What's up? Happy May, and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where today I'm going to be talking about a brand new film coming out of Uncork'd Entertainment on May 3rd. I was sent a screener to check out this film a couple of days ahead of schedule, so thank you to the folks over at Uncork'd Entertainment and October Coast for providing me with that. Now, without further ado, let's chat about a little film entitled Breath. Breath is ultimately about a scientist that makes a living testing and measuring earthquake activity. One day, while out in the middle of nowhere, this woman trips and falls down a deep ravine, hurting and possibly breaking her leg and stranding her in the middle of nowhere with no real way to escape. There's no cell reception, and she only has so much water to go off of. Will she make it out alive? Only time can tell. One of my favorite films ever is a movie that I rated a rare 100% score to, and that was 127 Hours, starring James Franco. If you've never seen that film or even heard about it, I highly recommend it. But it'll be hard not to compare Breath to 127 Hours because it's essentially the same exact plot, minus the true story biopic approach, and also minus the giant boulder that trapped James Franco's character. His story's a little bit more unique because he had a way to escape. It was right there, but he was also literally pinned down by a giant boulder at the same time. This woman actually has quite a bit of space in her ravine, but she's still stuck all the same, and her leg is too badly injured to climb out. Beyond that, you also have even more similarities because one thing that's going to happen in the middle of nowhere while you suffer from dehydration, malnutrition, and insomnia is that your mind's probably going to be playing tricks on you. It happens in both movies, done a little bit better in 127 Hours, but that's to be expected. Now, one of the major differences between these two movies is the atmosphere, or the theme. While 127 Hours is much more focused on happenstance and dealing with the physical, Breath is much more of a character-driven film. Her entire story about being stuck in this cave, or this ravine, or whatever you want to call it, seems to be an allegory for something much more deeper, like depression, or just about feeling literally stuck between a rock and a hard place, or the literal sense of rock bottom. And I can appreciate that fact because getting out and living becomes much more powerful than just your typical will I survive this plot. While that is there, it's much more of an internal struggle. Should I survive? Do I have the will or the strength to do what must be done? And that was kind of cool, and it was extremely relatable. There is a massive focus in the film on narration as well, and I have mixed feelings on that because I give props to the writers for taking the time and the energy to focus on the dialogue for most of those scenes, but at the same time, the film never once needed the narration. There's something much more real, visceral, and vulnerable about a movie covering isolation with little to no dialogue, like 127 Hours, but also like Castaway. Think about it. The actors don't necessarily have to explain things to the audience. They just need to show them through expression on what they're feeling, what they're thinking. Our lead actress here is Rachel Day, and she actually does a great job shouldering the film and showcasing those emotions that I was talking about earlier. But her narration stuff felt less emotional. The narration stuff felt unemotional, actually. Like somebody was reading a book out loud. I just had the thought that I might die out here. But during the scene, you can actually see that this character is afraid. She's terrified at the implication of dying in the middle of nowhere, all alone. The narration just didn't fit the acting. And like I said, it wasn't even needed in the first place. So while I give the writers props for focusing on that, it might have technically made the film worse at the end of the day. Another thing to keep in mind is that the film is indeed low budget. And while they did a decent job taking the budget that they had and running with it in a way that works pretty well, I specifically like the production and set design with the cave that she fell into, but you still could tell certain things aren't quite real. For instance, there's a snake that shows up in the film now and then, and it looks like maybe a toy that's getting dragged through dirt. The walls of the cave, it looks fine, except for when it zooms in super close to the cave, and it kind of, sort of looks plastic. Not fully, mind you, but like maybe a really realistic looking, wall climbing set, if that makes sense. Or later in the film, there's a filter, I feel like, that's supposed to make things look like they're underwater. Again, it's not a horrible effect. but clearly not actually water. The best way to put this film is to probably just say that it's the penny saver version of 127 Hours, with maybe a more specific focus on character development and an allegory for internal struggles with depression and self-worth. But is it a film that I downright recommend you watch right away? Not so much. I mean, if you loved 127 Hours and you like the concept of being stuck alone in the wilderness with no easy way to escape or clear path to live, then, check it out. It's definitely not gonna beat those films, but if you're that kind of movie buff, then you might get something out of it. With that being said, let's go ahead and break down my final score, starting with my technical or unbiased score, which for me was an okay 58%, meaning that it did what it needed to do most of the time, but you can also tell that certain things aren't all that they could be, and potentially its biggest downfall was the lack of originality and insistence on narration that probably hurt it in the long run. So 58%. While my bias score is close to that, but a little bit lower at 54%, because I appreciated the acting, parts of the premise, and I wanted to generally know how it would end. Movies like this have to be really careful on how they end the story, because if they get rescued or if they die, then everything in the film is pointless, because in either scenario, all they would have had to do is just sit there and do nothing and wait, and they'd still end up in the same scenario. So I won't tell you how this one ends specifically. Some of the lack of budget was clearly noticeable, but maybe that won't really be the case for you, and maybe it won't be the end of the world either. So really, see for yourself, But for me, combining those two scores together, we got 58 and 54. We wind up with the final score for Breath, which I have at 56%, 56 out of 100 possible stars, or for me, that is a C- letter grade. Guys, thank you for tuning in, and I would like to hear your thoughts on this film if you've seen it in the comment section down below. And as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace out.